I spent months trying to be the perfect husband while my wife was busy being the perfect cheater. I thought I was fixing our marriage until I found out she was fixing dinner at a hotel with her boss. Hello, everyone. Get ready for this mess because this story has more plot twists than a soap opera and just as much drama. For 2 years, I thought I was the problem in my marriage. Turns out the problem was having dinner at our house every weekend and playing with our kids. Yeah, it was her boss. The same guy whose wife I was making small talk with while our spouses were apparently making much more than small talk. Let me take you back to when I genuinely believed I was living the good life. The perfect storm of marital bliss. Picture this, a 43-year-old guy thinking he's living the American dream with his wife of 16 years, 2 great kids, and what he believed was a rock-solid marriage that survived the typical young couple drama. I'm talking about those perfect Saturday afternoons where I'm flipping burgers on the grill, my wife's laughing at something our neighbor said, and both kids are running around the yard with grass stains on their clothes. Our 14-year-old daughter was thriving in school, our 9-year-old son was that kid who made friends everywhere he went, and I honestly believed we were crushing this whole family thing. This wasn't some social media fake happiness either. I genuinely thought we had built something special together after working through our early marriage struggles. My wife managed a major advertising company and pulled in serious money, while I worked in engineering building a decent career. Between our 2 incomes, we could afford the kind of lifestyle that let us focus on being present parents instead of constantly worrying about bills. Sure, I wasn't perfect, but I was the guy who remembered anniversaries, helped with homework, and actually showed up to school events instead of making excuses. The comedy gold here is that I was so focused on being a good husband that I completely missed the obvious signs that my wife was getting her emotional needs met elsewhere. When she started becoming more distant and critical, I did what any logical person would do and assumed I was the problem. The classic guy move, right? Instead of questioning her behavior, I questioned mine. Instead of wondering why she suddenly had impossibly high standards, I figured I needed to step up my game and meet them. What makes this whole situation even more ridiculous is that her boss was more than a colleague. He was practically family, grilling burgers alongside us every weekend. Talking about people who spent every other weekend at our house, whose kids played with our kids, and who knew where we kept the spare key. Their daughter was practically a 3rd child in our house, and our son treated the place like his second home. These weren't just work colleagues who showed up to the annual company picnic. These were the people we called when we needed someone to watch the kids, the ones who helped us move furniture, and the couple we'd sit around the fire pit with on Saturday nights talking about everything and nothing. I remember countless evenings where all 4 of us adults would be sitting around our kitchen table after dinner, kids running around the house, and I'd be thinking about how lucky we were to have such solid friendships. The boss would compliment my wife's cooking, she'd laugh at his jokes, and I'd just smile thinking it was nice that my wife had such a supportive work environment. His wife would tell stories about their family trips, and I'd mentally note ideas for our own vacations. Meanwhile, my wife would chime in with how well-organized and thoughtful her boss was, and I'd nod along like an idiot, thinking she was just appreciating good leadership qualities. The real kicker is that when my marriage started feeling rocky, I actually went to this guy for advice. Picture this scene, me sitting across from my wife's affair partner, genuinely asking him how to be a better husband. I'm talking about those man-to-man conversations where I'd admit I was struggling to make my wife happy and ask for his perspective since he seemed to have such a great relationship with his own life. He'd give me these thoughtful responses about communication and effort, nodding sympathetically while I explained how frustrated I was that nothing I did seemed to work anymore. Which makes it even crazier that I asked my own nemesis for marriage tips. This man sat at my dinner table, ate food I grilled, watched football games in my living room, and gave me marriage advice while he was actively destroying my marriage. The level of audacity required to maintain that level of deception is honestly impressive in the worst possible way. He'd pat me on the shoulder and tell me that marriage takes work, that women need to feel appreciated, and that I should keep trying new approaches to connect with my wife. Meanwhile, he was apparently connecting with her in ways that would have gotten him punched in the face if I'd known. The most pathetic part is that I was actively trying to model myself after this guy based on my wife's constant references to him. She'd mention how he handled difficult clients, how he organized team meetings, how he remembered details about people's personal lives. I took notes like I was studying for an exam, thinking I could improve our marriage by incorporating his professional strengths into my personal life. I bought books about leadership and communication, thinking maybe I could learn to be more like the man she clearly admired. Looking back, the signs were more obvious than a neon billboard, but I was too busy trying to be the husband I thought she wanted to notice that she already had the man she actually wanted. When she'd come home energized and happy after work events, I'd feel relieved that she was in a good mood instead of questioning why her mood improved so dramatically around her colleagues. When she'd mentioned staying late for important projects, I'd offer to handle dinner and bedtime routines, proud that I was supporting her career ambitions. The whole situation was like a bad sitcom where everyone in the audience can see the setup except the main character. I was the guy applauding his wife's professional development while she was developing something much more personal with her boss. The biggest threat to my marriage wasn't some stranger I'd never met or some random guy trying to hit on my wife at a bar. It was the man whose hand I shook every weekend, whose kids called me uncle, and who helped me carry groceries into the house when his family came over for dinner. The enemy was literally breaking bread at my table, and I was passing him the salt. But even with all this happening right under my nose, I somehow managed to miss every single warning sign that should have been obvious to anyone with half a brain. Red flags I completely missed. The warning signs were practically screaming at me, but I was too busy trying to be the world's most understanding husband to hear them. My wife started this thing where she'd constantly bring up her boss in conversation. Not just work stuff, but everything. She dropped lines like, "My boss always brings flowers on Fridays, and he never forgets his wife's coffee order," as if I'd get a playbook from him, not her. At first, I thought she was just sharing workplace observations, maybe even trying to give me helpful hints about being more thoughtful. I actually took notes sometimes, thinking I was getting free marriage advice from someone who clearly had his act together. What I didn't realize until much later was that these comparisons had been going on for 2 years. Spanning the entire duration of what I now know was their affair. She'd mentioned how he organized his home office, how he planned family vacations, how he remembered details about his wife's day. Instead of wondering why she was keeping such close tabs on this guy's romantic gestures, I started buying flowers on Fridays. When she mentioned he sent his wife encouraging texts during stressful days, I started sending encouraging texts. The man was basically giving me a playbook for how to treat my wife, and I was following it like gospel while he was already implementing the advanced course with her. What really should have tipped me off was how she'd get this dreamy look when talking about him compared to the annoyed expression she'd wear when talking about me. She'd light up describing his latest project management strategy or how he handled a difficult client, then immediately shift to criticizing how I loaded the dishwasher or forgot to put the toilet seat down. The contrast was so obvious that our kids probably noticed it before I did, but I was too focused on trying to measure up to her impossible standards to see the pattern. My wife started asking me why I couldn't be more like him in increasingly specific ways. Why didn't I take initiative without being asked? Why couldn't I anticipate her needs? Why was I so clueless about romance? These weren't general complaints about our marriage. They were basically her asking why I couldn't be her boss. I thought she was challenging me to step up my game, so I went full research mode. I bought relationship books, watched YouTube videos about being a better husband, even signed up for one of those online courses about emotional intelligence. The book told me to plan surprise dates, so I planned surprise dates. They told me to be more spontaneous, so I tried being spontaneous. They told me to listen more actively, so I listened more actively. Every gesture was met with lukewarm praise because she was comparing notes with her affair partner, not me. She'd accept the flowers, but mention how her boss chose better arrangements. She'd go on the dates, but compare them to places her boss had taken his wife. Nothing I did was ever quite right, but instead of questioning why she had such detailed knowledge of another man's romantic habits, I assumed I was just really bad at this whole husband thing. Her behavior changed in ways that should have been obvious red flags, but I interpreted them as personal growth. She started dressing better for work, buying new clothes and spending more time on her appearance. She seemed more confident and energetic, especially on days when she had work meetings. She'd come home from company events practically glowing, talking about how inspiring the leadership team was and how much she learned from collaborative projects. I thought it was wonderful that she was finding fulfillment in her career and developing professionally. She started working late more often, staying for important meetings and urgent projects that couldn't wait until Monday. When I'd offer to handle dinner and bedtime routines, she'd seem relieved and grateful, which made me feel like I was being supportive of her ambitions. She'd text me updates about how the meetings were running long, or how the team was making real progress on critical deadlines. I'd text back encouraging messages and tell her not to worry about rushing home, that I had everything under control. The criticism escalated to the point where she seemed genuinely irritated by my existence. Simple things like how I chewed food, how I organized the garage, or how I interacted with the kids became sources of frustration for her. She'd roll her eyes when I'd tell stories at dinner, sigh when I'd suggest family activities, and generally act like spending time with me was a chore she had to endure. But she never acted that way when her boss and his wife were around. During those gatherings, she'd be animated and engaged, laughing at jokes and participating in conversations with genuine enthusiasm. What's embarrassing is how I'd actually seek validation from her boss about my relationship concerns. During those backyard barbecues or family game nights, I'd find myself talking to him about marriage stuff, asking for his perspective on how to keep relationships fresh and exciting. He'd give me thoughtful advice about communication and effort, nodding sympathetically when I'd admit I was struggling to make my wife happy. He'd tell me that marriage takes work, that women need to feel appreciated, and that I should keep trying new approaches to connect with her. This guy would sit across from me at my own kitchen table, eating food I'd grilled, and give me sincere advice about how to save my marriage while he was actively destroying it. He'd pat me on the shoulder and tell me not to give up, that every relationship goes through rough patches, and that the key was persistence and creativity. Meanwhile, he was apparently being very persistent and creative with my wife in ways I couldn't have imagined. I was getting relationship counseling from my wife's affair partner, taking notes on how to win back a woman who was already emotionally invested in the guy giving me the advice. The level of deception required to maintain the charade is honestly impressive, and the level of obliviousness required to fall for it is honestly pathetic. I was the husband asking another man how to make his wife happy, never realizing that other man was already making her very happy in ways that had nothing to do with my efforts. For 2 years, I lived in this alternate reality where I was the problem and she was the victim of my inadequacy. I questioned everything about myself while never questioning anything about her increasingly suspicious behavior. But sometimes the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light, even when you're doing everything possible to stay in the dark. The night everything changed. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night around 10 p.m. when we were both lying in bed doing our usual routine. I was reading on my tablet and she was scrolling through her phone like every night. The bedroom was quiet except for the occasional page flip and soft tapping sounds from her screen. Then I heard something I hadn't heard in months. My wife was giggling. Not just a little smile or quiet chuckle, but actual out loud giggling, like she was watching the funniest video on the internet. She was staring at her phone screen with its huge grin on her face, making these little happy sounds that I honestly hadn't heard from her in forever. My first reaction was genuine happiness because she seemed so genuinely delighted by whatever she was looking at. I set down my tablet and turned towards with a smile because seeing her laugh felt like finding water in a desert after months of her being cold and distant. I figured she was watching some funny cat video or reading jokes from one of her social media groups. I thought this might be one of those rare moments where we could connect over something silly and laugh together. So I did what any normal husband would do when his wife is cracking up next to him in bed. I asked her what was so funny. Simple question, right? I mean, when someone is laughing that hard at something on their phone sitting right next to you, it's pretty natural to want to share in whatever is making them so happy. I wasn't being nosy or demanding or trying to invade her privacy. I was just curious about what had put her in such a good mood for the first time in weeks. Her reaction was like I had just asked her to hand over state secrets. She immediately viciously pulled that phone away from me and held it against her chest like I was trying to steal it from her. The giggling stopped instantly and her whole face changed from happy and relaxed to angry and defensive in about 2 seconds. She looked at me like I'd just committed some terrible crime by asking a simple question about what was making her laugh. I asked again what was so funny, thinking maybe she just didn't hear me the first time or was still distracted by whatever she was reading. That's when she completely lost it on me. She started yelling about how I was being invasive and couldn't she have any privacy in her own bedroom. She was acting like I had demanded to read her diary or go through her personal belongings when all I did was ask about something that was making her laugh out loud right next to me. The whole situation was so ridiculous that I actually started laughing a little bit myself. I told her I wasn't trying to invade her privacy, I just wanted to know what was so funny since she seemed to be having such a good time. I mean, think about it. If someone's cracking up at their phone and you ask what's funny and they get furious at you for asking, that's pretty weird behavior. Normal people share funny things with their spouse, especially when they're laughing that hard at something. She kept clutching that phone like it contained nuclear launch codes and telling me I was being controlling and suspicious. She said I should trust her and not question everything she does on her phone. The whole argument was insane because I wasn't questioning anything until she made it into this huge dramatic scene over a simple question. If someone showed me something funny on their phone, I would just show them what I was laughing at. That's what normal couples do. What really got to me was how out of character this whole reaction was for her. In 16 years of marriage, we used to show each other videos and pictures all the time. This sudden secrecy over something that was supposedly just entertaining was completely unlike the woman I married. I started thinking back to other times recently when she had been protective of her phone and realized this wasn't the first time. She had started keeping it face down on the table during dinner and taking it with her to the bathroom, which she never used to do. She would get nervous if I was nearby when she was texting and would angle the screen away from me, even when I wasn't trying to look at it. These behaviors were all new within the past few months. The argument went on for another few minutes with her insisting I was being paranoid and me trying to explain that I just wanted to know what was funny. She eventually said it was just some stupid meme from a coworker and that it was none of my business anyway. If it was just a stupid meme from a coworker, why couldn't she just show me the stupid meme from a coworker? The whole explanation made no sense, and her anger about it made even less sense. I finally dropped it because the fight was getting ridiculous, and I didn't want to wake up the kids with our arguing. She put her phone on the nightstand face down and turned away from me to go to sleep. I lay there in the dark thinking about how strange the whole situation had been and how defensive she had gotten over something that should have been completely innocent. Normal people don't guard their phones like Fort Knox when their spouse asks about something funny. That night, I couldn't sleep because something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole interaction. The woman lying next to me had just acted like a completely different person over something that should have been no big deal. In all our years together, even during our worst fights, we had never had an argument about her refusing to share something funny with me. The secrecy and defensiveness were so out of character that I knew something was seriously wrong. I spent the next few hours lying awake, thinking about all the other little changes in her behavior over the past months. The phone protection, the working late, the constant comparisons to her boss, the criticism of everything I did. Individual things that I had explained away as stress or personal growth suddenly seemed like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. My gut was telling me that her reaction tonight was about much more than protecting a funny meme, and that her secretive shift was more than just stress. That night, I lay awake realizing I needed to figure out what was really going on with my wife, but I had absolutely no idea how to go about it. Amateur detective work. The next morning, I decided to stop guessing and just ask her directly what was going on. Over coffee, I told her that her reaction the night before had really bothered me and that I was starting to worry there might be something she wasn't telling me about work or her relationship with her colleagues. I tried to approach it calmly and rationally, thinking maybe if I created a safe space for her to talk, she would just come clean about whatever was happening. Instead, she absolutely exploded at me again, accusing me of being paranoid and controlling and insecure. She said I was imagining problems that didn't exist and that my suspicious behavior was creating tension in our marriage. She went on this whole rant about how I needed to trust her and stop looking for reasons to doubt her integrity. The conversation became this circular argument where she kept insisting nothing was wrong, while simultaneously getting more and more defensive about my concerns. I asked her directly if she was having an affair or if there was something inappropriate going on with her boss. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Absolutely not," with this tone of voice like I had just accused her of murder. She said she couldn't believe I would even suggest such a thing and that I was being ridiculous and hurtful. The denial was so strong and immediate that it almost made me feel guilty for asking, but something about her reaction still felt off to me. That evening, I worked up the courage to ask if I could look at her phone just to put my mind at ease. She immediately said no and asked why I would need to see her phone if I trusted her. I explained that I wanted to trust her, but her secretive behavior was making that difficult, and that showing me her phone would help reassure me that nothing was going on. We went back and forth about this for almost an hour, with me explaining that I just needed some reassurance and her insisting that my request was inappropriate. Finally, she threw her hands up and said fine, if looking at her phone was going to end this ridiculous argument, then I could look at it. She handed me her phone with this annoyed expression like she was humoring a child having a tantrum. I opened her text messages and immediately noticed something weird. There were conversations with her coworkers and friends and family members, but when I looked at the message threads with certain people, including her boss, there were these obvious gaps in the conversation. Like, I could see a text from 3 days ago, and then the next message was from yesterday with nothing in between. It was clear that messages had been deleted, and recently, too. I asked her about the missing messages, and she said she sometimes deleted old conversations to save storage space on her phone. That explanation might have made sense if she was deleting entire conversations, but she was clearly deleting specific messages while leaving others. The whole phone inspection was basically useless because she had obviously cleaned it up before handing it over to me. I could see evidence that conversations had been deleted, but I couldn't see what those conversations actually said. I spent the next few days feeling like I was losing my mind because I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it. The deleted messages combined with her defensive behavior and the whole phone giggling incident added up to something fishy, but I still didn't have the smoking gun I needed. I was walking around the house looking at my wife and wondering if she was lying to my face about having an affair. I finally broke down and called my friend Mike, who works in IT, and asked him if there was any way to recover deleted text messages from a phone. He said it was possible depending on how recently they were deleted and whether they had been backed up to the cloud. I felt weird asking him to help me spy my wife, but I was desperate to know the truth about what was happening in my marriage. Mike came over the next weekend when my wife was at her book club meeting and spent about an hour working on her phone. He was able to recover some of the deleted messages, and what he found made my stomach drop. There were bits and pieces of text conversations with her boss that were definitely not work-related. I'm talking about good morning messages and late-night texts, and conversations about missing each other and planning to meet up. The messages weren't explicitly sexual, but they were intimate in a way that made it clear these two people had feelings for each other that went way beyond professional collaboration. There were references to inside jokes and shared experiences that I knew nothing about. I saw messages like, "I can't wait to see you sent at 2 a.m., which was definitely not a work request. There were texts about how much they enjoyed spending time together and how they wished they could see each other more often. Reading those fragments felt like getting punched in the gut because they confirmed what I had been afraid to admit to myself. My wife was having an emotional affair at minimum, and probably a physical one too. The woman I had been married to for 16 years was sharing intimate conversations with another man while lying to my face about it. The recovered messages showed this had been going on for years, not just recent months. The betrayal was so complete and devastating that I actually threw up after reading the messages. But even with those fragments, I still didn't have the full picture of what was happening. The recovered messages were just pieces of longer conversations, and they didn't give me details about when or where they were meeting or how long this had been going on. I knew now that my suspicions were correct, but I also knew that confronting her with partial evidence would just give her another opportunity to deny and deflect. She was clearly skilled at hiding evidence and lying about her activities. But even with those fragments, I still needed the full story.
3 weeks later, my
strategic.
wife announced she had a work emergency on Saturday morning that would require her to go into the office for most of the day. She said there was a critical client presentation on Monday,
and the team needed to pull together all the materials over the weekend to make sure everything was perfect. The way she explained it made it sound like this was a make-or-break situation for a major account, and that her presence was absolutely essential to getting everything done on time. I nodded along and told her I understood that work emergencies happened and that I would handle everything at home with the kids. She seemed relieved that I was being so understanding about her weekend plans and started gathering her laptop and work files like she was preparing for a major business meeting. She even mentioned specific details about the client and the presentation timeline, which made the whole story sound legitimate and well thought out. But something about the situation bothered me enough that I decided to do a little fact-checking after she left. I called the ad firm's main line around noon, figuring that if there was really a major emergency going on, someone would be there to answer the phone. The call went straight to the automated system that clearly stated the office was closed on weekends and that anyone with urgent business should call back during regular business hours. I hung up and called back thinking maybe I dialed the wrong number or maybe there was a different line for emergency situations. Same result. The office was definitely closed, and there was no indication that anyone was working there on Saturday. I even drove by the building later that afternoon and found the parking lot completely empty except for a security guard doing his regular rounds. The realization that my wife had lied about where she was spending her Saturday hit me like a truck. This wasn't some small misunderstanding or miscommunication about work schedules. She had created an elaborate story about a client emergency and presentation deadline that was completely false. She had looked me in the eye that morning and told me detailed lies about why she needed to be away from home for the entire day. I spent the rest of Saturday in this weird emotional state where I was angry and hurt and disappointed all at the same time. I kept thinking about how easily the lie had rolled off her tongue and how confident she had seemed while telling it. This was a woman who had been lying to me for months about her relationship with her boss, and now she was lying about basic things like where she was going and what she was doing on weekends. The kids asked where mom was, and I had to repeat her fake story about the work emergency because I couldn't exactly tell them that their mother was probably meeting up with her affair partner somewhere. I felt like an idiot standing in my own kitchen explaining to my children why their mom had to work on Saturday when I knew she was actually doing something completely different. I waited up for her to come home that night, even though I was exhausted from taking care of the kids all day and dealing with the emotional stress of knowing she was lying to me. She finally walked through the door at almost 2 a.m. looking tired, but also strangely energized in a way that reminded me of how she used to look after really good dates when we were younger. She had this satisfied expression on her face like she had just spent a really enjoyable day doing something she loved. The first thing she did when she got home was head straight to the shower without even saying hello to me or asking how my day went with the kids. She just walked past me like I was a piece of furniture and went upstairs to wash off whatever evidence of her day she was carrying around. The whole behavior was so obviously suspicious that I couldn't believe she thought I wouldn't notice. I sat in the living room, listening to the shower run and thinking about how she was probably washing off the smell of another man or removing any traces of where she had actually been that day. The thought made me physically sick because I realized that this woman I had been married to for 16 years was treating me like a complete fool who would believe whatever story she decided to tell me. When she came downstairs in her robe, she finally asked how my day went and whether the kids had been good. The casual way she asked made it clear that she had no idea I had figured out she was lying about the work emergency. She was acting like everything was normal and that her story about the client presentation was still intact. The level of deception was honestly impressive in the worst possible way. I wanted to confront her right then and there about the office being closed and about her obvious lies, but I realized that would just give her another opportunity to come up with new lies or explanations. She had already proven she was skilled at thinking on her feet and creating believable stories to cover her tracks. If I confronted her without solid evidence, she would just deny everything and probably get better at hiding her activities. What really hit me was the realization that she didn't care about my obvious suffering or the damage she was doing to our family. She had watched me struggle for months to figure out what was wrong with our marriage and had never once considered just telling me the truth about what was happening. She was perfectly content to let me think I was the problem while she continued her affair with her boss. That night, after she left me to care for the kids while she spent the day with another man, I realized I couldn't play victim's detective anymore. I had to act. I needed to gather proper evidence before taking any action because I wanted to be absolutely certain about what was happening, and I wanted to have solid proof that couldn't be denied or explained away. The Saturday work emergency lie had confirmed my suspicions, but I needed more than just one obvious lie to build a case for ending our marriage. I knew I had to do something drastic, but I had no idea what that something should be. Unlikely alliance. My hand shook dialing her number, but I had to know if I was the only fool being lied to. I found the boss's wife's contact in my wife's phone and called her that Sunday afternoon while my wife was at the grocery store with the kids. When she answered, I just blurted out that I needed to talk to her about something important involving our spouses and asked if she could meet me for coffee somewhere private. The meeting was awkward as hell because I had to explain to this woman, who I considered a friend, that I suspected her husband was having an affair with my wife. I showed her the recovered text messages and explained about the Saturday work emergency lie and all the other suspicious behavior I had noticed over the past few months. She listened to everything without saying much, but I could see the shock and recognition in her eyes as I laid out all the evidence. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a long time before she told me that she had been having her own suspicions about her husband's behavior lately. She said he had been working late more often and seemed distracted and distant at home. She had noticed him being more secretive with his phone and more defensive when she asked questions about his day. She had been wondering if something was wrong but hadn't wanted to seem paranoid or controlling. The two of us sat in that coffee shop comparing notes about our spouses' strange behaviors and realized we had both been living with the same lies and deceptions for months. She told me about times when her husband came home from work in unusually good moods and how he had started paying more attention to his appearance and wardrobe. I told her about my wife's constant comparisons to her husband and how she had become increasingly critical of everything I did. We both felt like idiots for not seeing the obvious signs sooner, but we also felt relieved to finally have someone who understood what we were going through. Neither of us had wanted to believe our spouses were capable of this level of betrayal, but the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. We decided to work together to uncover the full truth about what was happening between our spouses. The boss's wife turned out to be much better at detective work than I was. She had access to her husband's computer and phone when he was sleeping, and she knew his passwords and habits. The guy had been incredibly careless about covering his tracks, probably because he never suspected his wife would go looking for evidence. What she discovered made my stomach drop. The affair had been going on for almost 2 years and was way more extensive than I had imagined. They had been meeting at expensive hotels during lunch breaks and after work events. They had taken weekend trips together using business conferences as cover stories. They had even been meeting at our houses when one of us was out of town or working late. The violation of our homes felt like an extra layer of betrayal that made the whole situation even more painful. What really got to me was reading messages where they talked about how clueless we were and how easy it was to fool us. They made jokes about our trusting nature and seemed to find our ignorance entertaining rather than concerning. My wife had shared details about our private conversations and intimate moments with her affair partner. She had complained about me to him and compared our marriage unfavorably to their relationship. The boss's wife and I spent hours going through all the evidence and trying to process the scope of the deception. We found hotel receipts and restaurant bills and travel confirmations that showed they had been living essentially double lives for years. They had created this whole alternate reality where they were a couple while maintaining their marriages and families as cover stories. We talked about different ways to handle the situation and considered various forms of revenge that would make them pay for what they had done to us. We could have exposed them publicly or told their friends and family members or made their affair known at work. We could have played the same game they were playing and started our own affair to get back at them. But we both decided that stooping to their level would only make us feel worse about ourselves in the long run. Instead, we chose to take the high road and handle this through proper legal channels. We both contacted divorce attorneys and started preparing paperwork to end our marriages. We gathered all the evidence we had collected and organized it in a way that would be useful for custody and property division proceedings. We supported each other through the emotional process of accepting that our marriages were over and planning for our futures as single parents. The coordination between us became essential as we prepared for the next phase of our plan. We had to maintain the appearance of normal marriages while secretly preparing for divorce proceedings. We had to continue acting like friends with each other while knowing that our spouses were betraying us with each other. The whole situation required us to become actors in our own lives while we got ready to drop the bombshell. We discovered through the recovered messages that they had another hotel meeting planned for the following Friday afternoon. They were getting bolder about their meetings and had started booking rooms for entire afternoons instead of just quick lunch encounters. This gave us the perfect opportunity to catch them in the act and serve them with divorce papers simultaneously. We had the full affair map hotel, receipts, text logs, even travel dates covering nearly 2 years of deception. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. They had been so confident in their ability to fool us that they had gotten careless about hiding their tracks. Now it was time to turn their overconfidence against them and give them the shock of their lives. The perfect trap. We synchronized hotel room, timing, and law enforcement to serve both papers simultaneously. The boss's wife and I had the hotel name from their recovered text messages, the room number from credit card records, and their exact Friday, February 5th p.m. slot from their careful scheduling conversations. I contacted the sheriff's office and explained our plan to surprise 2 affair partners with legal documents at the same time. The deputy seemed genuinely entertained by the unusual assignment and agreed to handle the proper legal procedures. Meanwhile, the boss's wife coordinated with her attorney to ensure her husband's papers would be ready for service at the exact same moment. I had more spreadsheets for that surprise than I did for my last big engineering project. What struck me as hilarious was how confident these 2 were about their secret affair, while being completely oblivious to the fact that their spouses had figured everything out weeks ago. They were still sending each other text messages about their upcoming hotel meeting and making jokes about how easy it was to fool us. They had no idea that we were reading every message they sent and using their own words to plan their downfall. Their overconfidence was actually working in our favor because they weren't being careful about covering their tracks anymore. They were booking hotel rooms under their real names using credit cards that showed up on statements we had access to. They were making dinner reservations at restaurants and taking photos together that they probably thought were private, but were actually being saved to cloud storage accounts we could monitor. The morning of the confrontation, I could barely eat breakfast because my stomach was churning with nervous energy and anticipation. I kept checking my phone to make sure the sheriff's deputy hadn't canceled and that the timing was still on track. I reviewed the divorce papers one more time to make sure everything was in order and that my wife's name was spelled correctly on all the legal documents. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was preparing for the most important performance of my life. I arrived at the hotel about an hour early because I wanted to scout the location and make sure I knew exactly where everything was located. The place was one of those upscale business hotels with a fancy lobby and expensive artwork on the walls. I found it ironic that my wife was conducting her affair in such a classy establishment while destroying our family at home. The contrast between the elegant surroundings and the ugly reality of what was happening there made the whole situation even more twisted. The sheriff's deputy arrived right on schedule, carrying the official divorce papers in a manila envelope. He was a middle-aged guy who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, but also appeared to be enjoying the unusual nature of his assignment. He explained the proper procedures for serving the documents and made sure I understood what would happen once we knocked on the hotel room door. I positioned myself in the lobby where I could see the elevators and watch for my wife to arrive. The plan was for me to wait until she went upstairs to the room and then give her about 15 minutes to get settled before making my move. The timing had to be perfect because we wanted to catch them in a compromising situation, but we also needed to make sure they were actually in the room when we knocked. I watched her strut in wearing a new dress with full confidence, never knowing she was walking into her own undoing. She walked through the lobby like she owned the place, carrying herself with an energy that made it clear she was excited about her afternoon plans. She looked happier than I had seen her in months, which made me realize how much energy she had been putting into this relationship while neglecting our marriage. Watching her get on the elevator and disappear to meet her lover felt like watching a stranger instead of the woman I had been married to for 16 years. This wasn't the mother of my children or the person I had built a life with. This was someone who had been living a double life for years and was about to face the consequences of her choices. The 15 minutes felt like the longest 15 minutes of my life. I sat in the lobby pretending to read a newspaper while actually watching the clock and thinking about how different my life was going to be after this confrontation. I was about to end my marriage in the most dramatic way possible, and there was no going back from what I was about to do. The deputy and I took the elevator to the 4th floor and found the room number that matched the one from their text messages. I could hear voices inside and the sound of the television, which confirmed that they were definitely in there together. The deputy knocked on the door with authority and announced that he was there to serve legal documents. There was immediate silence from inside the room, followed by frantic whispering. After a few minutes of shuffling sounds and muffled conversations, the door finally opened. The hotel confrontation. My wife stood there in nothing but a white terry cloth bathrobe that barely reached her knees, with her hair all messed up and her face looking like she had just seen a ghost. The sight of my wife of 16 years dressed like she was about to take a shower, while clearly having just been doing something completely different with another man, was both shocking and oddly satisfying at the same time. She looked so vulnerable and exposed, standing there in that doorway, trying to process what was happening to her perfect little secret afternoon. Her eyes went back and forth between me and the sheriff's deputy like she was watching a tennis match, except instead of following a ball, she was trying to figure out if this was real life or some kind of horrible nightmare. The panic on her face was immediate and complete as she realized that her husband was standing outside her affair partner's hotel room with a uniformed law enforcement officer holding official-looking documents. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out for the first few seconds. The deputy stepped forward and asked her to confirm her full name and address, which she answered in this confused whisper like she wasn't sure if giving her real information was going to make this situation better or worse. She kept looking back into the room behind her where I could hear her boss scrambling around, probably trying to get dressed and figure out what was happening. What she didn't know was that at the exact same moment, another deputy was serving her boss's wife with identical papers at his office next door, creating the perfect coordinated strike we had planned. When the deputy handed her the divorce papers and explained that she was being served with legal documents regarding the dissolution of her marriage, she actually took a step backward like the papers were going to burn her hands. She stared at the manila envelope for what felt like forever before looking up at me with this expression of complete disbelief. I think she was still hoping this was all some kind of misunderstanding that could be explained away with the right combination of lies and excuses. The deputy maintained his professional demeanor throughout the whole interaction, which I appreciated, because the situation was already dramatic enough without adding any unnecessary commentary. He simply confirmed that the papers had been properly served and that she should contact an attorney if she had questions about the legal proceedings. His matter-of-fact approach to the whole thing made it clear that this was just another day at work for him, even though it was the most important day of my marriage. She tried to hand the papers back to me and said there must be some mistake and that we could talk about this at home like reasonable adults. The idea that she thought we could have a reasonable conversation about her 2-year affair was almost funny, except for the fact that it showed how completely out of touch she was with reality. She seemed to think that getting caught in a hotel room with her boss was something we could just work through with better communication. Then she started with the explanations about how this wasn't what it looked like and how she could explain everything if I would just give her a chance to talk. She said I had the wrong idea about what was happening and that I was jumping to conclusions based on incomplete information. I'd already heard every excuse in the book over the past 2 years, and this was the final chapter. The fact that she was standing there in a bathrobe outside her affair partner's hotel room while trying to convince me that nothing inappropriate was happening was so ridiculous that I almost felt sorry for her. I told her that I had been collecting evidence for weeks and that I knew exactly what had been happening between her and her boss for the past 2 years. I mentioned the recovered text messages and the fake work emergencies and all the other lies she had been telling me while conducting her affair. The look on her face when she realized I had been investigating her activities was priceless because she finally understood that she had been caught completely off guard. She grabbed my arm and begged me not to leave and said we needed to talk about this situation before I did something I would regret. The physical contact felt weird because I hadn't been touched by her in months except for the occasional accidental bump in the hallway at home. She was trying to use physical contact to keep me there and force me to listen to whatever story she had prepared for getting caught with her affair partner. I pulled my arm away and told her that the time for talking had passed and that she should have thought about having conversations with me before she started having them with her boss instead. The deputy confirmed that his job was done and that any further communication should go through our respective attorneys. The formal legal process was now in motion, and there was no going back to pretending everything was normal. As I walked toward the elevator, I could hear her calling my name and asking me to please come back so we could figure this out together. She was still standing in that doorway in her bathrobe, holding the divorce papers like she couldn't believe what had just happened to her perfectly planned secret afternoon. The sound of her voice getting more desperate as I got further away was exactly the kind of justice I had been hoping for. The elevator doors closed and I felt free for the first time in years. Walking away from that hotel room felt like closing a chapter on the worst period of my marriage and opening a new one where I would never again be anyone's backup plan or second choice. But I had no idea that the real fireworks were just getting started. Within seconds, her phone lit up with frantic calls from her boss, both blindsided by our coordinated strike. The two of them were trying to communicate through their phones while simultaneously being hit with the reality that their secret affair had just become very public very quickly. They had gone from thinking they were the smartest people in the room to realizing they were the biggest fools in the building. My wife kept calling me and leaving these desperate voicemails where she was crying and begging me to come back to the hotel so we could talk about the situation. She said she could explain everything and that I was making a huge mistake by jumping to conclusions based on what I had seen. The fact that she thought being caught in a hotel room with her boss while wearing nothing but a bathrobe required some kind of explanation was honestly hilarious. She was still trying to control the narrative even though the evidence was literally wrapped around her body. Meanwhile, her boss was apparently having his own meltdown because his wife had shown up at his office with a sheriff's deputy and divorce papers at the exact same time I was confronting my wife at the hotel. The coordination of our plan had worked perfectly because neither of them had any warning that both of their spouses were taking action simultaneously. They couldn't warn each other or coordinate their stories because they were both dealing with their own legal emergencies. The boss started calling my wife and leaving messages about how they needed to figure out what their spouses knew and how they could minimize the damage to their respective marriages. These conversations were happening over voicemail because neither of them could actually talk to each other in real time while dealing with divorce proceedings. The irony of their secret communication system breaking down at the moment they needed it most was pretty satisfying to watch unfold. Both of them kept insisting that what happened at the hotel was just a misunderstanding and that they had never intended for their friendship to become anything inappropriate. They claimed they were just meeting to discuss work projects and that the hotel room was booked for privacy reasons related to confidential business matters. Their flimsy line about confidential meetings was laughable, but I moved past caring. The fact that they thought anyone would believe that story when she was caught in a bathrobe and he was clearly undressed in the room was almost insulting to our intelligence. My wife sent me a series of text messages explaining that she had only been at the hotel to help her boss with a presentation that required absolute secrecy due to client confidentiality agreements. She said the bathrobe situation was because she had spilled coffee on her clothes and needed to rinse them out in the bathroom sink. The elaborate nature of her lies was actually impressive because she was creating this detailed backstory in real time while dealing with divorce papers and legal proceedings. The boss was apparently telling his wife a similar story about how my wife was helping him with a major client proposal that required them to work in a secure location away from the office. He claimed that hotel rooms were commonly used for confidential business meetings and that there was nothing inappropriate about their arrangement. The fact that both of them had come up with nearly identical cover stories suggested they had probably discussed what to say if they ever got caught. Their attempts to explain away a 2-year affair as a series of innocent business meetings was honestly pathetic, but also showed how desperate they were to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. They were both throwing around terms like professional collaboration and client confidentiality. Like these phrases could somehow erase months of deleted text messages and hotel receipts. They seemed to think that if they used enough business jargon, it could make their affair sound like a legitimate work relationship. The most ridiculous part was how they both refused to accept that their marriages were actually over and that divorce proceedings were moving forward regardless of their explanations. My wife kept saying that we could work through this misunderstanding with couples counseling and better communication. She seemed to think that getting caught in a hotel room with her boss was just another marital challenge that we could overcome with the right therapeutic approach. Her boss was apparently making similar appeals to his wife about how their marriage was too important to throw away over a misunderstanding about his professional relationships. He was claiming that divorce was an extreme overreaction to what he characterized as a simple case of poor judgment about maintaining appropriate boundaries with female colleagues. The fact that he was calling a 2-year affair a boundary issue showed how completely out of touch he was with reality. Both of them started making these pathetic excuses about never intending to leave their spouses and how their affair was just an emotional outlet that got out of hand. They claimed they were both committed to their families and that their relationship had never been about replacing their marriages. The idea that they thought having a secret affair for 2 years while lying to their spouses daily was somehow compatible with being committed to their families was absolutely insane. My wife kept insisting that she loved me and had never wanted to hurt me, and that her relationship with her boss was just a mistake that spiraled out of control. She said she had been planning to end things with him and focus on fixing our marriage, but hadn't found the right time to have that conversation. The timing of this revelation coming right after she got caught in a hotel room with him was pretty convenient for her narrative. The satisfaction I felt watching both of them lose complete control of the situation was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For months, they had been the ones with all the power making decisions about our lives and manipulating us with lies and deception. Now, they were the ones scrambling to understand what was happening and trying to react to decisions that other people had made about their futures. The moment when they realized that their betrayed spouses had been planning this confrontation for weeks was probably the most devastating part of the whole experience for them. They had been so confident in their ability to fool us that they never considered the possibility that we might be working together to expose their affair. The fact that we had been sharing information and coordinating our response while they thought we were still clueless was a complete reversal of the power dynamic. Their secret affair that had lasted 2 years was permanently destroyed in a single coordinated strike that took less than an hour to execute. All their careful planning and sneaking around and elaborate lies had been undone by 2 betrayed spouses who decided to work together instead of suffering in isolation. With their lies in tatters, the real fallout began professionally and personally. Justice served cold. The professional consequences hit both of them exactly where it hurt most. My wife's company launched an internal investigation into their relationship since it violated workplace policies about managers having affairs with subordinates. Her boss ended up losing his position and getting demoted to a regular employee role while she faced disciplinary action for her part in the inappropriate workplace relationship. She actually resigned shortly after being served with the divorce papers, probably because she knew the investigation would destroy whatever was left of her professional reputation. The workplace fallout was honestly more satisfying than I expected, because it showed that their affair hadn't just damaged their marriages, but had also jeopardized their careers and reputations. My wife went from being a successful manager at a major advertising company to being known as the woman who had an affair with her boss and got caught in a hotel room wearing nothing but a bathrobe. That kind of reputation doesn't just disappear overnight, and it definitely affected how colleagues and clients viewed her professional credibility going forward. What gave me the most satisfaction throughout this entire process was maintaining my moral high ground and never once stooping to their level of deception and betrayal. I could have easily started my own affair or engaged in petty revenge tactics, but I chose to handle everything through proper legal channels and maintain my integrity throughout the divorce proceedings. This approach allowed me to feel genuinely superior to both of them because I had proof that I was the better person in this situation. My confidence grew dramatically as the divorce moved forward, and I realized I had made the right decision by refusing to try to save a marriage that was already destroyed by my wife's choices. Every meeting with lawyers, every court appearance, and every interaction with my wife reinforced my conviction that I deserved better treatment than what I had been accepting for the past 2 years. The legal process gave me a sense of control and empowerment that I hadn't felt since before I discovered the affair. My wife's desperate attempts at reconciliation after getting caught became increasingly pathetic as she realized I was serious about ending our marriage. She offered me everything under the sun if I would just give her another chance to prove that she could be the wife I deserved. She promised to quit her job, cut off all contact with her boss, and dedicate herself completely to rebuilding our relationship. She even suggested couples counseling, intensive therapy, and marriage retreats that could help us work through the trust issues. The thing that made her reconciliation attempts so ridiculous was that they were clearly a reaction to getting caught, rather than genuine remorse for her actions. She wasn't sorry about having a 2-year affair with her boss. She was sorry about getting exposed in such a humiliating way. She wasn't concerned about the pain she had caused me and our children. She was concerned about the consequences she was facing for her poor decisions. Her timing was terrible because she was trying to save our marriage only after I had already decided it wasn't worth saving. The contrast between my strategic patience and her impulsive affair highlighted everything that was wrong with how she approached problems in relationships. While I spent months carefully investigating her behavior and planning my response, she had jumped into an affair without considering the long-term consequences for our family. While I maintained my composure and handled everything through proper legal channels, she was making emotional decisions and desperate attempts to control damage that was already done. Friends and family members kept telling me I should consider forgiving her and giving our marriage another chance, especially for the sake of our children. They said that everyone makes mistakes and that 16 years of marriage was worth fighting for despite what had happened. But I held firm because 2 years of systematic betrayal and deception isn't a slip-up or a moment of weakness. It's a deliberate choice to destroy your family while lying to your spouse's face every single day. My resolve to never be anyone's fallback plan became the cornerstone of my recovery and the foundation for every decision I made about my future. I refused to accept the role of the understanding husband who would take back his cheating wife after she got caught and dumped by her affair partner. I recognized that my worth as a person and as a partner was too valuable to waste on someone who had already demonstrated that I wasn't her first choice. This realization that I deserved better treatment than what I had been accepting was probably the most important breakthrough in my entire healing process. I had spent months blaming myself for my wife's unhappiness and trying to improve myself to meet her impossible standards. Now, I understood that the problem wasn't with me, but with her character and her decision to handle marital problems through deception rather than honest communication. My friendship with the boss's wife continued to develop throughout the divorce process and provided me with support and understanding that I couldn't get from anyone else. We had both been through the same betrayal, and we understood each other's pain and anger in ways that other people couldn't appreciate. Our connection was based on mutual respect and shared experiences rather than a romantic attraction, which made it a healthy and supportive relationship. The fact that my wife absolutely hated my friendship with the boss's wife was an added bonus because it showed her that I was moving on with my life and building new relationships based on honesty and respect. She couldn't stand that I was getting emotional support from someone who understood exactly what she had done to me and who validated my decision to end our marriage. The friendship represented everything that was missing from my relationship with my wife during the final years of our marriage. My complete transformation from someone who had been taken advantage of to someone who demands respect was the ultimate outcome of this entire experience. I gained confidence, self-respect, and a clear understanding of my worth that allowed me to move forward with a sense of empowerment and renewed focus on my own happiness. I went from being a doormat who accepted lies and excuses to being someone who refuses to tolerate disrespect from anyone, including people who claim to love me. The man who had spent 2 years trying to figure out what was wrong with his marriage and how to make his wife happy was gone. In his place was someone who understood that relationships require mutual respect and that love without honesty is worthless. I had learned that my happiness and self-respect were too important to sacrifice for someone who had already proven they didn't value what we had built together. If you've ever been lied to or ghosted in a relationship, drop a comment below showing you won't settle for scraps. Because at the end of the day, there's one lesson that changed everything for me about how I approach relationships and my own worth. That lesson was simple but life-changing. Self-respect isn't something you negotiate or compromise on. From clueless husband to empowered ex, my self-respect was the ultimate victory. After reading books on healing from affairs and teaming up with another betrayed spouse, I found my backbone. When someone shows you they don't value what you bring to the relationship, you need to believe them and act accordingly. I spent many years accepting treatment that I would never give to someone else and making excuses for behavior that was clearly wrong. If this story gave you hope, you can walk away with dignity. Like and subscribe for more unbelievable true tales. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's simply refusing to accept less than you deserve and walking away.